The dive shop owner told me that 2 divers went missing in that lake 4 years ago. They were found in the woods, half a mile away. I've been a certified scuba diver for 15 years. Freshwater diving is my preference. I like the visibility and the quieter environment, and the fact that you're not dealing with currents or surge. There's a large lake about half an hour from where I live that I've been diving regularly for almost a decade. I know that lake better than most people know their own backyards. I know where the old dock pilings are, where the channel drops off, where the sunfish like to congregate in the summer. I know that lake, which is why what I found that morning made no sense at all. It was a Saturday in late September. The water temperature had dropped enough that I needed my thicker wetsuit, but the visibility was excellent, better than it gets in the summer when the algae blooms cloud everything up. I kitted up alone in the public boat launch, which I had done dozens of times before, and I entered the water just after 8 in the morning. My plan was to follow the old channel bed that runs along the eastern side of the lake. It drops to about 60 feet at its deepest point, and I had found some interesting features down there over the years. Old bottles, what looked like the remains of a small wooden structure, things like that. That morning I decided to cut across the middle of the lake floor first and approach the channel from a different angle than usual. I was at about 40 feet when I noticed the circle. It was large, maybe 30 feet across, perfectly round in a way that looked deliberate rather than natural. The rest of the lake floor in that area was covered in the usual combination of silt and aquatic plant growth and debris. Inside the circle there was nothing, just bare pale sediment, completely undisturbed, as if nothing had grown there or nothing had even settled there. The boundary between the circle and the surrounding lake floor was sharp and clean, like someone had drawn a line. I hovered above it for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it. I'd never seen that section of the lake floor before, despite years of diving there, which was strange on its own. I took some photos on my underwater camera and moved in a little closer. That's when I felt the water beneath me move. It wasn't a current. The lake doesn't have currents at that depth. This was displacement, something large moving through the water below me. I looked down and could see the edge of my dive light fading into black water about 15 feet beneath me. Whatever had caused the displacement was down in that darkness, below the range of my light. I stayed completely still and watched the dark water below the circle. It passed again, slower this time. I could feel it more than see it. A pressure change in the water. The way the silt at the edges of the circle stirred slightly as something moved beneath it. It was long and it was large, and it did not surface. It didn't make a sound either. It just moved through the darkness below me with a slow, deliberate patience that made every instinct I had scream at me to get out of the water. I ascended slowly, the way you're supposed to. I did my safety stop at 15 feet, even though my hands were shaking. When I broke the surface and pulled out my regulator, I sat in the water for a moment, just breathing, before I swam back to the launch. I loaded my gear into my car without rinsing it, which I never do. I drove to the dive stop on the other side of the lake, where I'd been a regular customer for years. The owner, a man named Dale, who had been diving that lake since before I was even born, was behind the counter when I walked in. I described what I'd found. The circle and the displacement, the size of whatever was moving beneath it. Dale listened without saying anything. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You know about the Harmon brothers?" he finally asked. He told me that 4 years ago, 2 brothers, both experienced divers, had gone out on the lake on a Sunday morning and never came back. Their boat was found drifting near the center of the lake that afternoon. All their gear was still on board, and both of them were in the water when they disappeared. They were found 3 days later, but not in the lake. They were found in the woods on the eastern shore, about half a mile from the water's edge. They were alive, but neither of them would say what happened to them or how they had gotten there. One of them never dived again. The other left the area entirely within a month, and as far as Dale knew, he never came back. "What do you think was down there?" I asked him. Dale shook his head slowly. "I stopped diving the middle of that lake about 5 years ago," he said. "I stick to the shallows now." He paused. "I think you should do the same." I still dive, and I still go to that lake sometimes, but I stay in the shallows on the western shore, and I don't cross the channel. I haven't been back to the center of that lake since that morning. I still have the photos on my underwater camera. The circle is clearly visible in all of them. In the last photo I took before I started my ascent, if you look at the bottom edge of the frame, where my dive light fades into the dark water below the circle, there is something there. I've shown it to people and gotten different reactions. Some say it's just the light playing off the silt. Some go very quiet and hand the camera back without saying anything. I know what I felt down there. I know the size of the displacement. I know what it felt like to be 40 feet underwater with something that large moving in the darkness directly beneath me. I don't need the photo to tell me what it was. I'm just glad I made it out of that water alive. The three of us have never talked about what we saw in that cove. Some things are just better left unsaid. My friends Kara and Todd and I found a cove by accident. We were hiking a coastal trail in Northern California. It was a long trail that wound through dense forests until eventually it dropped down to the cliffs above the ocean. About 5 miles in, we noticed a narrow, unmarked path branching off from the main trail, heading downhill toward the water. There was no signage, no indication of where it led, and it didn't appear on the trail map we downloaded before the hike. Kara wanted to check it out. Todd and I agreed. The path dropped steeply through coastal forest for about a quarter mile before it opened up into a small rocky beach tucked between two headlands. The cove was stunning. The water was a deep, clear green, completely calm, sheltered from the ocean swell by the rock formations on either side. It was completely private. There was no way to access it from the water, and the only trail in was the unmarked path we had just come down. We hadn't planned to swim, but we had our suits on under our clothes because we'd hoped to find a beach or something at some point on the hike. We changed and got into the water. It was cold but manageable. The water was so clear that you could see everything underneath it. It was maybe 15 feet down to the rocky bottom. We swam and floated and explored the rock walls on either side of the cove for about an hour. It was one of those perfect, unexpected moments that you get sometimes when you're hiking. Completely unplanned and exactly right. Then Todd grabbed my arm. He pointed down and to the left, toward the base of the north rock wall. Something was moving along the rock face, about 8 feet below the surface. It was long, much longer than any fish I could think of, and pale, almost white. The way it moved felt wrong. Not the darting finned movement of a fish, something slower and creepier. It moved along the base of the rock wall, the way a hand might move along the surface in the dark, feeling its way, exploring. It disappeared around the base of the rock formation and didn't come back. None of us said anything. We just swam to the rocky beach and got out of the water. We dried off and got dressed and didn't discuss what we had seen. I think we were all doing the same thing, trying to find a rational explanation before committing to saying anything out loud. It was Kara who noticed the trail. She had walked to the base of the path to start putting her pack back on, and she stopped and stood very still. "Don't look suddenly," she said quietly, "but there's something on the trail." Todd and I turned slowly. The path through the forest started about 30 feet from the beach. The first 20 feet were visible before it curved into the trees and the light faded, standing just at the point where the light gave way to the shadow, far enough back that we couldn't make out any details, was a shape. It was tall and it was still, and it was facing the cove. We stood on that rocky beach for over an hour watching it, and it didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there in the shadow at the edge of the forest, looking down at us. We talked through our options quietly. There was no other way off the beach. We couldn't go back into the water, not after what we had seen along the rock wall. The only way out was the trail, and the trail was blocked. Then at some point, the way things always seem to happen in situations like this, I looked up, and it was completely gone. No movement, no sound of something retreating into the forest. Just there one moment and then gone the next. We waited another 10 minutes before we moved. Then we walked up that trail as fast as we could without running, staying close together and not looking back. About halfway up, Todd stopped and pointed at the mud on either side of the path. There were impressions in the soft ground on both sides of the trail, deep and evenly spaced, like something had been standing there with its weight distributed wide. They were not footprints exactly. There were no individual toe or heel impressions, just two long oval depressions pressed deep into the mud, one on each side of the trail, as if something very heavy had been standing there for a very long time. We didn't stop to examine them. We didn't take pictures. We just kept moving. When we got back to the main trail, I think all three of us exhaled at the same time. We hiked the 4 miles back to the trailhead, mostly in silence. When we got to the car, Cara said that she needed a minute and sat on the bumper with her head down. Todd said he was fine, but his hands were shaking when he unlocked the car. We've talked about it a few times since then, but none of us can seem to explain it. None of us have gone back. None of us have been able to identify what was moving along the rock wall, and none of us have been able to explain what was standing on that trail. I've looked at fish and marine animal databases, and nothing matches the movement or the coloring or the size. What I keep coming back to is the timing of it. Whatever was in the water disappeared around the base of the rock wall, and minutes later, something was standing at the top of the only trail off the beach. The rock wall and the forest are connected at the base of the headland. There's a gap there, a dark space between the rock and the cliff face, where the forest roots come down to the water line. I think whatever was in the water came out of the water. I think it came through that gap, and I think it got to the trail before we did. I don't hike coastal trails anymore, and I haven't been in the ocean since that day. I know that's probably an overreaction, and I know rationally that whatever it was is contained to that cove on that particular stretch of coast. But rationality only gets you so far when you're lying awake at 3 a.m, thinking about something pale and long moving along a rock wall 8 feet underwater, feeling its way toward you in the dark. The floodwater rose in minutes and pushed me off the trail. Whatever came in with it was already looking up at me when I found high ground. I run trails 5 or 6 days a week. I've been doing it long enough that I'm good at reading conditions and weather and terrain and what the forest sounds like when something has changed. I don't spook easily out there. I wanted to say that up front before, because what I'm about to describe is not the kind of thing I would normally give any weight to, and the fact that I'm still thinking about it more than a year later should tell you something. Last spring, I was doing a long training run through a state forest about 20 minutes from my house. It's a route that I've run probably 200 times. 14 miles of mostly single track that winds through mixed hardwood forest and crosses 2 creeks before looping back to the trailhead. About 7 miles in, the sky opened up. Not unusual for spring in this part of the country, but this storm was faster and heavier than the forecast had suggested. Within about 15 minutes, the trail in front of me was running with water. The creek I needed to cross to complete the loop had already jumped its banks and was spreading fast across the low flat section of the trail that runs through the floodplain. The water was rising quickly, knee-deep and moving with enough force that I didn't feel comfortable crossing. I turned to backtrack, and I found that section of the trail behind me was flooded too. The water was coming up fast from both directions. I scrambled up a steep embankment on the north side of the trail. It was maybe 15 feet above the floodplain. It was rocky and covered in roots, but it was solid. I got up without much trouble, and I turned around to look at the situation down below me. The floodplain was completely underwater now. The trail had disappeared entirely. The water stretched through the forest floor as far as I could see in both directions, carrying leaves and debris along with it. It was maybe 3 feet deep in the low areas. I could see the tops of the trail markers sticking up above the surface. I figured I would wait it out. The storm was already passing, and the rain was easing up. These flash floods in that forest typically recede within an hour or two. I had my phone and enough signal to send a message to my husband, letting him know what had happened. Then I settled in to wait. About 20 minutes after I got up on the embankment, I saw something moving in the water below me. At first I thought it was a deer. The way that it moved seemed like something that was trying to navigate an uncertain footing, a kind of careful, deliberate picking through the water. But as I watched it longer, the movement looked wrong. It was too fluid, too low to the surface. The body, whatever body it had, barely cleared the waterline. It moved like something that was more at home in the water than above it, using the flood not as an obstacle, but as cover. Then it stopped. It was directly below my embankment, maybe 20 feet down in the water, and it was looking up at me. I couldn't make out detail. The water was murky and the light through the forest was gray and dim from the storm, but the orientation was unmistakable. Whatever it was had stopped moving and had directed its attention upward at me, specifically at me. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. It stayed there for a long time. Then it started moving again, back and forth along the base of the embankment, slowly pacing, close to the mud wall below where I was sitting, like it was looking for a way up or simply making the space. I watched it pace for what my phone later told me was almost 90 minutes. Every time I thought it might be moving away, it would circle back. It seemed completely unbothered by the receding water, adapting its movement as the depth decreased, flattening lower to the surface as the floodplain drained. When the water finally dropped enough that the trail markers were fully visible again, and the crossing looked manageable, the thing below me was gone. I didn't see it leave. One pass along the embankment, and then nothing. I came down off the embankment and looked at the mud along the base of it. The ground was churned and disturbed all along the stretch directly below where I had been standing. The marks were deep and irregular, not paw prints or footprints, just a general disturbance in the mud, as if something had been moving back and forth through it repeatedly and leaving impressions with whatever it used to propel itself. I crossed the creek and I ran the remaining 7 miles back to my car faster than I have ever covered that distance. That night I developed a fever of 102 degrees. It lasted 4 days. My doctor ran blood work and found nothing. No infection, no bacterial contamination, nothing that would explain the fever. What she did note, and what she couldn't explain, was the discoloration on both my legs, from the knee down. The skin had taken on a dark malted tone, almost bruised looking, across every part of my legs that had been in the flood water when I scrambled up the embankment. It faded slowly over about 3 weeks. My doctor photographed it and said that she had never seen anything quite like it. She asked if I had been in contact with any unusual chemicals or pollutants. I told her I didn't think so. I still ran that state forest. I know the route well enough that I can usually avoid the floodplain entirely, and I check the weather obsessively before I head out now. I haven't crossed that section of trail since it happened, but sometimes when I'm running through that part of the forest and the light is low and the creek is running high, I'll look down at the water and catch myself looking for movement, for something low to the surface, fluid and deliberate, moving through the dark water with that horrible patient quality, something that already knows where I run, something that knows how to wait.